When I heard my daughter-in-law whisper those words in the next room, my heart practically stopped in my chest. "This old woman won't last long," she said with that tone of satisfaction that made my blood run cold. I lay in bed, feigning sleep, but every word of that conversation pierced the thin walls like sharp knives slicing into my soul. They were celebrating, yes, celebrating what they believed to be my final days. The sound of clinking glasses echoed through the house as my son, my daughter-in-law, and even my grandchildren raised their glasses in a macabre toast to my supposed demise. I had spent the last 68 years building a life, raising a family, accumulating property and savings that I would now realize were being coveted as if I were already dead and buried. My name is Margaret, I am 72 years old, and all my life I have believed that family is everything, that the love we give our children returns multiplied when we need it. How innocent the first have been all these years. It all began 6 months before that horrible night. I had received a diagnosis that completely changed the course of my life. The doctor informed me of a serious heart condition, something that would require surgery and prolonged treatment. When I told my son, David, and his wife, Rachel, their reaction was strangely exaggerated. Rachel cried profusely, hugged me tightly, and said she would do anything to help me through this difficult time. David held my hand and promised to be by my side through every appointment, every test, every procedure. In that moment, naively, I felt supported and loved. How foolish I was not to realize that those tears were not of sadness for my health, but rather of anticipation of the inheritance they believed was ever closer. In the days following my diagnosis, Rachel began visiting me with unusual frequency. She had never been particularly attentive to me. Our relationship had always been cordial but distant. Suddenly, she showed up at my house every day, bringing me homemade soup, offering to clean the house, and insisting on organizing my medications. At first, I confess, I was touched by her dedication. I thought my illness had awakened a genuine affection in her that had previously been dormant. How wrong I was. She began asking questions about my property, my bank account, and where I kept important documents. She said she needed to know these things in case something happened to me, so she could help me in emergencies. Her concern seemed so sincere that I ended up revealing information I should have kept to myself. I told Rachel about the 3 houses I owned in different neighborhoods of Boston. I explained that in addition to the house I lived in, I had 2 rental properties that generated a comfortable monthly income of approximately $6,000. I also mentioned the savings I had accumulated over decades of hard work, a total of $450,000 deposited in various investments and savings accounts. I talked about the stocks my late husband Thomas had bought years ago, tech stocks that had appreciated dramatically and were now worth around $200,000. Every piece of information I shared made Rachel's eyes light up in a way that I interpreted at the time as admiration, but later understood to be pure greed. David also changed his behavior drastically. My son, who used to visit only on special occasions, started showing up several times a week. He offered to take me to doctor's appointments, pick up my medications at the pharmacy, and go grocery shopping. He insisted that I give him power of attorney so he could handle bureaucratic matters if I became too weak to leave the house. He argued that it would be more practical, safer, and more sensible to have a family member with legal authority to act on my behalf. I initially resisted, but David was so persistent, so convincing, that I finally gave in. I signed the power of attorney, believing I was making my life easier, without realizing I was signing my own death warrant. The weeks passed, and my health was relatively stable. Surgery was scheduled for 3 months from now, and the doctors were optimistic about the prognosis. But David and Rachel seemed increasingly anxious, increasingly impatient. They began suggesting that I should make my will, that I should organize my financial affairs, that I should decide the fate of my assets while I still had clarity of mind. They said it was a matter of responsibility, that I would be protecting the family from possible future complications. The pressure was constant and subtle, always disguised as concern and care. It was then that Rachel brought a lawyer to my house. She said he was a family friend, someone I trusted deeply and could help me organize all the paperwork properly. The man introduced himself as Harold Bennett, an attorney specializing in estate planning. He was extremely polite, speaking in complicated legal terms that confused me, and presenting documents with tiny print I could barely read without my glasses. Rachel stayed by my side the entire time, quickly explaining each document, telling me it was all standard procedure, that I just needed to sign in the designated places. I signed, and signed several papers that afternoon, confident that my family was taking care of me in the best possible way. What I didn't know was that among those documents was a change in ownership of one of my properties. Rachel and David had made me sign the transfer of the house in Cambridge, a property worth approximately $320,000, directly into Rachel's name. They used the power of attorney I had given them and documents I had signed without properly reading to execute this transfer without me being fully aware of what I was doing. I discovered this only weeks later, when I accidentally received a letter from the land registry confirming the change of ownership. When I questioned David about it, he looked at me with a coldness I'd never seen in my son's eyes before. He said I'd agreed to the transfer, that we talked about it, that it was a strategy to protect the estate from potential taxes and legal complications. He claimed I was forgetting things because of the medication, that I was confused, that he was just doing what I'd asked. Rachel added that the house would always be mine, that it was only in her name for bureaucratic reasons, that I didn't need to worry about anything. They made me feel like I was crazy, like my memory was failing me, like I was incapable of understanding simple situations. I began to feel like a prisoner in my own home. David and Rachel increased the frequency of their visits, but now I realized they weren't coming out of genuine affection or concern. They rummaged through my closets, checked my mail, and asked increasingly direct questions about where I kept my jewelry, documents, and valuables. Rachel began taking things away, always with a plausible excuse. She'd say she was going to clean my jewelry, organize my documents, or store valuables in a safer place. Every item that left my house rarely returned. My grandchildren, Jennifer and Matthew, who were 23 and 21 years old, also moved with me. Before, they visited me occasionally, always polite but distant. Now they came frequently, but always accompanied by their parents and always with a specific purpose. Jennifer began borrowing money constantly. She said she needed to pay for college, that she had unexpected expenses, and that she promised to pay me back soon. I lent because she was my granddaughter, because I wanted to help, because I believed in those promises. Over the course of 2 months, I lent her $17,000, which I never saw again. Matthew was more discreet, but he also found ways to get money. He said his car had broken down, that he needed a new computer for work, that he had unexpected medical bills. Another $10,000 flowed from my account into his hands. Things got even stranger when Rachel began bringing in different doctors to evaluate me. She said she wanted a second opinion on my diagnosis, that she wanted to ensure I was receiving the best possible treatment. But the doctors she brought in asked strange questions, focusing more on my mental state than on my heart condition. They asked about my memory, my decision-making ability, and whether I felt confused or disoriented. I answered honestly that I sometimes felt tired because of the medication, but that I was mentally clear and capable. Even so, I noticed the meaningful looks they exchanged with Rachel, as if they were constructing some kind of narrative about my mental state. It was during one of these appointments that I overheard Rachel talking in the hallway with one of the doctors. She was saying that I was increasingly confused, that I kept repeating the same stories, that I could no longer manage my finances properly. These were all lies, lies she told to create an image of a senile and incapable woman. The doctor asked if she was considering filing for conservatorship, a legal process in which she would be appointed responsible for managing all my assets and decisions. Rachel replied that she was, yes, just waiting for the right moment, and that she wanted to do everything correctly and legally. At that moment, I finally understood. They were building a case to declare me mentally incompetent, to take complete control of my life and assets while I was still alive. They weren't just waiting for me to die to inherit, they were actively working to strip me of all decision-making power, to turn me into a will-less puppet while they plundered everything I'd spent a lifetime building. The shock of this discovery was so great that I had to hold on to the wall to keep from falling. My own son, his wife, my grandchildren, all conspiring against me as if I were an obstacle to be removed. I started paying more attention to everything going on around me. I started writing down conversations, dates, amounts, and bank transfers. I checked my bank statements religiously and discovered several transactions I hadn't authorized. Small amounts at first, $200 here, $300 there, but they gradually increased. David was using his power of attorney to make withdrawals from my account, always justifying them as expenses for my care, medication, and doctor's appointments. But the amounts didn't add up. They were much higher than necessary. Over the course of 3 months, more than $25,000 had been withdrawn from my account without my consent. I tried to talk to David about it calmly and directly. I arranged a meeting, just the two of us, without Rachel, hoping I could tap into the love I imagined he still felt for me. I showed him the statements, pointed out the discrepancies, and asked for explanations. He didn't even try to deny it. Instead, he looked at me with a contempt that cut through my heart like a sharp blade. He told me I was too old to understand how money works, that he was just managing my resources more efficiently, that I should be grateful to have someone looking out for me. When I insisted that I wanted the power of attorney back, that I wanted to regain control over my own finances, he simply laughed. He said it was too late for that the documents had already been signed, that it would be a legal battle I was neither physically nor mentally capable of facing. I left that conversation completely devastated. The son I raised, breastfed, taught to walk and talk, and supported in every decision of his life, was treating me like a nuisance, like a source of money to be exploited. I cried for hours that night, not only over the financial betrayal, but over the death of the relationship I thought I had with my only son. The emotional pain was far worse than any heart condition I could have. Things worsened dramatically in the following weeks. Rachel began openly discussing placing me in a nursing home. She said I needed constant care, that it wasn't safe to live alone, that at my age any fall or accident could be fatal. She had even visited several facilities, brought pamphlets, and shown photos of the small, sterile rooms where she planned to confine me. The cruelest thing was that she presented all of this as if it were for my own good, as if she were doing me a huge favor by being so concerned about my safety and comfort. One afternoon, when Rachel thought I was asleep, I heard her talking on the phone with someone. She was discussing costs, nursing home fees, how long they would need to keep me there. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. She said it wouldn't be for long, that my heart was weak, that the doctor had given me a year at most to live, maybe less. She was literally calculating how much they would have to spend on me until my death, treating my existence as a temporary expense that would soon be eliminated. And then she laughed, a genuine laugh of satisfaction, and said that after that, they could finally enjoy their inheritance without worry. It was at that moment that I decided I would no longer be the passive victim of this situation. I was 72 years old, but I still had all my mental capacity intact, still had willpower, still had resources. I began to plan my response carefully, silently, without giving David and Rachel any indication that I knew exactly what they were doing. I continued to act like the fragile, confused woman they wanted me to be, but inside, I was gathering information, documenting abuse, preparing my comeback. First, I sought out a different attorney, someone Rachel and David didn't know. I found Martha Rodriguez, an attorney specializing in elder financial abuse cases. I told her the entire situation, showed her documents, bank statements, and recordings of conversations I had started making. Martha listened attentively and seriously, without treating me like a confused old woman. She explained that what was happening to me was more common than I imagined, and that there were specific laws to protect the elderly from financial exploitation, even when committed by family members. Martha helped me revoke the power of attorney I had given David. We did this legally and documentedly, with all the necessary paperwork to ensure he could no longer access my accounts or make financial decisions on my behalf. Martha then began the process of contesting the transfer of the property in Cambridge. We argued that the transfer had been made under duress and that it had taken advantage of my vulnerability due to my recent medical diagnosis. We gathered evidence that I was not fully capable of consenting to the transaction and that I had been misled about the nature of the documents I was signing. Meanwhile, I continued to keep up appearances with David and Rachel. They would come to visit, And I acted normally, not showing any sign of knowing anything. But I was documenting every visit, every conversation, every request for money. I discreetly installed small, hidden security cameras in my home that recorded every interaction. Martha advised me to do this so we would have concrete evidence of their behavior, of how they treated me when they thought no one was watching. The recordings revealed even worse things than I imagined. In one, Rachel and David were talking in the kitchen while I was supposedly resting in the bedroom. Rachel was saying they needed to speed up the process, that I was taking too long to die, that it would be more practical if I just had a fatal heart attack right away. David agreed and said they might be able to give me a little push, cause me more stress, make sure I didn't take my medication properly. They were literally discussing ways to hasten my death. I immediately took this recording to Martha. She was horrified, but also said it was exactly the kind of evidence we needed. She contacted the district attorney's office and filed the case as a possible attempted murder through willful negligence. An investigation was quietly opened, without David and Rachel knowing they were being investigated. While the investigation continued in secret, the day of my heart surgery arrived. It was a delicate procedure, but the doctors were confident it would be a success. David and Rachel made a point of accompanying me to the hospital, showing public displays of concern and affection. In the waiting room, while I was being prepared for the procedure, I set up my cell phone to record inside my purse, which I had left with Rachel. What I captured on that recording was the final confirmation of everything I suspected. Once they thought they were alone, David and Rachel began discussing what they would do if I didn't survive the surgery. Rachel said it would be the best-case scenario, that no one would question the death of an elderly woman during a complicated heart procedure. David agreed and added that they could finally sell all the properties, which already had interested buyers, just waiting for me to get out of the way. They discussed values, travel plans, and purchases they would make with the inheritance money. Jennifer was with them and commented that she could finally stop working, that the $300,000 inheritance would be enough to live comfortably for years. Matthew said he would use his share to start a business, something he'd always wanted but never had the money to invest. The surgery was a complete success. I survived, recovering well, much better than the doctors expected. When I woke up and saw David's face, I saw the barely concealed disappointment in his eyes. He was clearly frustrated that I was still alive, that he had to continue the charade of a worried son. But he kept up the act, held my hand, and said kind words devoid of any real feeling. During my recovery in the hospital, Martha took the opportunity to further advance the legal process. She obtained a court order freezing all my accounts and assets, preventing any movement or sale without court authorization. This meant that David and Rachel could no longer transfer or sell anything, not even the property already in Rachel's name. When they found out, they were furious. They showed up at the hospital demanding explanations, saying it was absurd, that they were only trying to help me. It was then that I decided to confront them directly. I asked for the nurses and security guards to be called. I wanted witnesses to what was about to happen. In a firm, clear voice, I told David and Rachel that I knew everything. I knew about the illegally transferred property, I knew about the unauthorized withdrawals, I knew about the conversations where they planned to declare me incompetent, I knew about the comments hoping for my death, I knew about the discussions about how to hasten my end. I saw the blood drain from their faces as I began detailing every conversation, every amount stolen, every lie told. Rachel tried to deny everything, saying I was delirious from the medication, confused, and making things up. But when I told her I had everything recorded, that I had cameras installed in my house, that I had a lawyer, and that the district attorney was investigating the case, she simply broke down. David remained silent, completely pale, clearly calculating the legal consequences of what they had done. I gave them one chance to defuse the situation. I told them they would immediately return the Cambridge estate to my name, return every penny stolen from my accounts, relinquish any right to my inheritance, and disappear from my life forever. In exchange, I would consider not pressing for criminal charges. Rachel tried to argue, tried to negotiate, but David was smarter. He knew they were in a no-win situation, that the evidence I had could put them in prison for years. It took 2 weeks, but they complied with all the demands. The property was transferred back to my name, with all fees and costs paid by them. I received back $23,000, which was all they could gather of the stolen money. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. They signed legal documents relinquishing any right to my inheritance, documents that Martha assured them were irrevocable and legally binding. Jennifer and Matthew tried to reach me after all this, sending messages saying they didn't know the gravity of the situation, that they were just following their parents' example, and that they regretted what they did. I didn't respond to any of their messages. They were adults, perfectly capable of distinguishing right from wrong, and they made their choices consciously. After ensuring that all legal matters were resolved, I decided to completely rewrite my will. I contacted Martha and explained that I wanted to leave absolutely nothing to David, Rachel, Jennifer, or Matthew. She advised me not to do it simply, as they could challenge the will by claiming I was under the influence of an emotionally or mentally compromised individual. Instead, we crafted something much more elaborate and strategic. We divided my assets as follows. The 3 properties would be donated to a charity that works with elderly victims of domestic abuse. My savings would be divided between my sister Clara, who has always been close and honest with me, and 2 cousins who supported me throughout this situation. The shares would be sold, and the proceeds would be used to create a fund that would provide free legal assistance to elderly people in similar situations. Every penny of my assets would be allocated to a specific purpose. Nothing would be left for my immediate family. But the most important part of the will wasn't the distribution of assets. It was a detailed letter explaining exactly why David and Rachel were being completely disinherited. In this letter, I chronologically documented every abuse, every lie, every attempt at manipulation. I enclosed copies of the transcribed recordings, the bank statements showing the unauthorized withdrawals, and the documents proving the fraudulent transfer of property. I stated that I was in full possession of my mental faculties, that I had been evaluated by multiple independent doctors who confirmed my decision-making capacity, and that I was making these choices fully consciously and deliberately. Martha suggested something else that I thought was brilliantly cruel. We included in the will a nominal bequest of $1 to each of them. David, Rachel, Jennifer, and Matthew. $1 each. This served a very specific legal purpose. It proved I hadn't forgotten them, that it wasn't an oversight or an omission. I'd actively chosen to leave them only $1, making it absolutely clear they deserved nothing more. The will reading ceremony wouldn't be until after my death, but I wanted them to know what was coming beforehand. I wanted them to live the rest of their lives knowing that all the plans, all the manipulation, all the suffering they'd caused me had resulted in absolutely nothing for them. So I did something Martha initially advised against but which I insisted on doing. I hosted a family dinner at my house. I said I wanted to make amends, that I was reflecting on everything that had happened, that I wanted to try to rebuild our relationship before it was too late. David and Rachel came, clearly suspicious but also hopeful that I might be retracting my decisions. Jennifer and Matthew also attended, all dressed up, bringing flowers and chocolates as if that could erase months of abuse and betrayal. I prepared an elaborate dinner, used my finest china, and opened a bottle of expensive wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. Throughout the meal, I kept the conversation light and friendly. I talked about my recovery, how strong and healthy I was feeling, and my plans for the coming years. I saw the discomfort growing on their faces as they realized I wasn't dying as soon as they'd expected. After dessert, I asked everyone to go to the living room. I told them I had something important to share with them. Once everyone was seated, comfortable, and waiting, I turned on the television. I started playing the recordings I'd collected over the months. The first was the conversation where Rachel said I wouldn't last long. The second was David and Rachel discussing putting me in a nursing home just to make it easier to access my money. The third was the conversation in the hospital waiting room, where they openly discussed what they would do with the inheritance if I died during surgery. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the voices on the recordings. I saw David turn red, then pale, then gray. Rachel began to cry, but they weren't tears of remorse, they were tears of someone caught red-handed. Jennifer and Matthew tried to get up and leave, but I firmly urged them to remain seated until the end. After the final recording ended, I looked at each of them with a calmness that surprised even myself. I told them that this dinner wasn't an attempt at reconciliation, it was a final farewell. I explained that my will was already prepared and registered, that they would receive nothing more than a symbolic $1 each, that all my assets would go to causes that truly mattered. I saw the shock, anger, and frustration on their faces as the reality of the situation finally sank in. Rachel had the audacity to stand up and shout that it wasn't fair, that they were family, that they were entitled to my money. I calmly responded that a real family doesn't plot the deaths of their loved ones, doesn't steal from those who trust them, doesn't celebrate an inheritance in advance as if the person still alive were already a corpse. David tried to appeal to our blood relationship, saying he was my only son, that I couldn't do that to him. I looked him in the eye and told him he had stopped being my son the moment he began to see me only as a source of money. I then ordered everyone to leave my house and never return. He said any attempt to contact them would be considered harassment and reported to the authorities. I warned them that I still had all the evidence of the attempted fraud and abuse, and that I would not hesitate to hand it over to the prosecutor if they tried to challenge the will or bother me in any way. One by one, they left, Jennifer and Matthew with their heads down, Rachel sobbing dramatically, David with his face contorted in barely concealed rage. I closed the door behind them and felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in months. I was free. Free from the manipulation, free from the fake visits, free from the constant feeling of being watched and evaluated like an asset to be liquidated. For the first time since my diagnosis, I felt like my home was truly mine again, my refuge, my safe space. The following months were spent rebuilding. I strengthened my bonds with Clara, my sister, and my cousins. I discovered I had a real support network, people who genuinely cared about me, not just about the size of my bank account. I started participating in a support group for elderly victims of family abuse, where I met others with similar stories. It was both comforting and devastating to realize that my situation wasn't unique, that there are countless sons and daughters-in-law out there exploiting their fathers and mothers-in-law in increasingly creative and cruel ways. Martha invited me to speak about my case at law schools and elder abuse awareness events. At first, I was reluctant, thinking it would be too painful to relive it publicly. But then I realized my story could help others recognize the signs of abuse before it was too late, and could encourage other seniors to take action and protect themselves. I accepted and began sharing my experience, always focusing on empowerment, not victimization. One of the most surprising things I discovered while sharing my story was how many people approached me after the talks. Ladies and gentlemen, some even younger than me, came to share their own experiences of family exploitation. There was a woman named Dorothy, 65, whose 3 children had created an elaborate scheme to drain her savings through phony investments. Another man, Robert, 78, discovered that his daughter had forged his signature to obtain loans using his home as collateral. Each story was a punch in the gut, a confirmation that greed can transform even the most sacred family bonds into purely financial transactions. I decided to go beyond speaking engagements. With Martha's help, I created a small foundation using part of my savings. The Margaret Thomas Foundation, named after my late husband and me, aimed to provide free legal assistance and psychological support to older adults experiencing family abuse. We hired 2 part-time lawyers, a trauma psychologist, and a social worker. The office was modest, just 3 rooms in a downtown Boston office building, but it was our dedicated space to making a real difference in the lives of vulnerable people. During this period of rebuilding my life, my health surprisingly improved significantly. Doctors commented that my heart was stronger than they expected after surgery, that my blood pressure had normalized, that I looked 10 years younger. I explained to them, half jokingly but also completely serious, that removing toxic people from my life had been better than any medication. The constant stress of dealing with David and Rachel, the anxiety of being manipulated and exploited, it was all literally killing me. Without that burden, my body was able to recover and thrive. About 8 months after the farewell dinner, I received an unexpected call. It was Jennifer, my granddaughter. She asked to meet me, saying she urgently needed to talk to me. My first instinct was to decline, but Martha, who was present when I received the call, suggested I at least hear what she had to say. I agreed to meet her at a public cafe during the day, with Martha present as a witness to whatever was said. Jennifer arrived at the cafe visibly nervous. She had lost weight, had dark circles under her eyes, and looked like a much more fragile version of the confident young woman she used to be. She began by apologizing, saying that only now, months later, could she truly understand the gravity of what had been done to me. She explained that Rachel and David were facing serious financial difficulties. Without the inheritance they had hoped for, and with the debts they had accumulated relying on that money, they were on the verge of bankruptcy. Their marriage was in tatters. They argued constantly about who had the idea to exploit me, each blaming the other for the failed plan. Jennifer said she wanted to distance herself from her parents, that she was seeing them for what they really were for the first time. She had started therapy and was confronting her own complicity in everything that happened. She wasn't asking for money, she made that very clear. She was just asking for a chance to rebuild some kind of relationship with me, even if it was just occasional conversations, even if we could never be truly close again. I listened to everything she said without interrupting. When she finished, I remained silent for a long moment. Finally, I told her I appreciated the apology, but that apologies didn't undo the damage done. I explained that she was a 23-year-old adult when she actively participated in the schemes to exploit me, old enough to know it was wrong to borrow $17,000 with no intention of repaying, old enough to understand that she was participating in a conspiracy against her own grandmother. I said that perhaps one day, in the distant future, we could have some superficial contact, but that for now, I needed to protect my peace and health by keeping my distance from all of them. I saw tears streaming down Jennifer's face as she processed my words. She nodded, saying she understood, that she respected my decision. Before leaving, she placed an envelope on the table. Inside was $2,000 in cash, accompanied by a note saying it was the beginning of the payment she owed me, that she would continue sending money monthly until the entire debt was paid off. I don't know if she would actually follow through on this promise, but the gesture at least demonstrated some awareness of responsibility for her actions. Matthew never tried to get in touch. I learned from Clara, who still maintained some distant contact with parts of the family, that he had moved to another state, trying to start over away from the scandal our situation had created. Apparently, he told people I was a cruel and vengeful old woman who had disinherited the family for frivolous reasons. This distorted version of the truth didn't surprise me. It's easier to play the victim than to admit that you tried to financially exploit your own grandmother. David and Rachel, according to my sources, went through a devastating period. Their mortgaged home was foreclosed upon when they couldn't keep up the payments. They had to move to a small apartment in a less affluent neighborhood. David lost his job under circumstances that were never entirely clear, but I suspected it was related to the criminal investigation that had been opened against them. Although I didn't pursue criminal charges as promised, the investigation left a lasting mark on their reputations. Rachel tried to contact me once, about a year after the farewell dinner. She showed up at my door late one night, clearly drunk, screaming that I had ruined her life, that everything was my fault, that I was a selfish, mean old woman. I called the police immediately. When officers arrived and the situation was explained, including the restraining order Martha had advised me to obtain, Rachel was taken into custody. She spent the night in jail and received a formal warning that any further attempts to contact her would result in criminal charges. This incident shook me more than I expected. Not out of physical fear, but out of profound sadness at seeing how far the situation had degenerated. This woman who was once my daughter-in-law, whom I welcomed into the family with open arms, who had been present at Christmas dinners and birthdays, was now standing at my door, drunk and screaming. What greed does to people is truly frightening. 2 years have passed since this whole saga began. I'm now 74, healthier and happier than I've been in a long time. My foundation has already helped 43 elderly people in situations of family abuse, offering not only legal support but also support groups and psychological counseling. Seeing these people regain control over their lives, empowering themselves in the same way I did, brings a sense of purpose I never imagined I had at this stage of life. I completely rebuilt my social circle. I now have a group of friends, all around my age, with whom I meet weekly to play cards, have tea, and talk about life. These are women who met me after the whole family situation, so there's no judgment or pity, just genuine friendship. I traveled for the first time in decades, visited Europe with Clara, and visited places I'd always dreamed of seeing but never prioritized when I was focused on building wealth to leave behind. The irony is not lost on me. I spent decades of my life saving every penny, investing carefully, accumulating property, all with the goal of leaving a generous inheritance to my son and grandchildren. And in the end, this very wealth I built with so much sacrifice was exactly what destroyed our family relationship. If I were poor, if I had nothing of value to leave, perhaps David would still visit me out of genuine love and not financial gain. It's a bitter but necessary lesson. I discovered an inner strength I never knew existed. All my life, I've been the devoted wife, the supportive mother, always putting others' needs before my own. I never imagined I'd be able to stand up to my own son, to mount a complex legal case against my family, to expose them publicly. But when you're pushed into a corner, when you realize it's literally a matter of survival, you find emotional resources you never knew existed. Martha became not only my lawyer but a dear friend. We had dinner together regularly, she introduced me to her circle of friends, and included me in social events. She once told me that my case was transformative for her career. She had always worked in elder law, but seeing the determination and strength I demonstrated inspired her to be more aggressive in defending her clients, to not accept mediocre settlements when she could fight for complete justice. The story of the will reading is still to come, of course, since I'm still very much alive and intend to remain so for many years to come. But I've already left detailed instructions on how I want it to be conducted. I want David, Rachel, Jennifer, and Matthew to be present. I want you to hear every word of the letter I wrote explaining why you're only receiving $1 each. I want you to face the full consequences of your actions, not just financially but emotionally. Perhaps it's cruel of me, but I feel it's a cruelty well deserved. One of the most liberating things about this whole experience was realizing that I don't owe anyone anything simply because of blood ties. All my life, I believed that family was everything, that you should forgive and forget anything because they're your kin. But I learned that real family is defined by actions, not biology. Clara is more family to me than David ever was, despite being just my sister and not my daughter. My friends in the letter group are more family than Rachel, who was technically part of my family for over 25 years. I've also completely restructured my financial life. I've diversified investments, consolidated accounts, and established trust funds for my chosen charities. Every detail is documented, and every decision has multiple layers of legal protection. If anyone tries to challenge my will after my death, they'll encounter an insurmountable wall of documentation proving that every choice was made with full awareness and mental capacity. I made a point of documenting not only the legal aspects of this journey but also the emotional ones. I kept detailed journals about how I felt at each stage, from the initial shock of betrayal to the renewed strength of recovery. These journals are part of my will, available to any family member who truly wants to understand what happened from a victim's perspective. I have no illusions that David or Rachel will read them with an open mind, but perhaps future generations, if there are great-grandchildren I will never meet, can learn from this story. Sometimes I wonder if I was too harsh. If I should have given them more chances, been more understanding, tried to reconcile. But then I remember the recordings, the conversations where they preemptively celebrated my death, the plans to declare me incompetent and lock me away in an institution. I remember the contempt in David's eyes when I confronted him about the stolen money, Rachel's coldness when we discussed how long I had left to live. And all doubts disappear. I did what was necessary to protect my dignity, my health, and my assets. The foundation I created has become my true legacy, more meaningful than any financial inheritance could be. We recently expanded to offer educational workshops, teaching seniors about their legal rights, how to recognize signs of financial exploitation, and what resources are available for protection. We bring in volunteer lawyers, psychologists, social workers, and even police officers specializing in crimes against the elderly. Each workshop is always packed, a sad testament to how common this problem is. I met a man in our workshops named George, 82, whose story reminded me a lot of my own. His 2 sons had conspired to sell his farm, a family estate for 3 generations, without his knowledge. They forged documents, bribed an appraiser, and did it all thinking George was too old to notice or do anything about it. But George, like me, fought back. With the help of our foundation, he reclaimed the property and completely disinherited his children. Now he volunteers at the foundation, helping other seniors find the strength to fight. Stories like George's constantly remind me that I made the right choice. Remaining a victim, accepting abuse in the name of maintaining a false sense of family peace, would not only be detrimental to me but would also mean missing out on the opportunity to use my experience to help others. Every person who comes through our foundation and regains control over their lives validates every difficult decision I've made. I celebrated my 74th birthday surrounded by people who truly care about me. Clara threw a surprise party at her house, inviting all my friends, some of the foundation's lawyers and clients, and even some neighbors who have become close friends. It was a genuine celebration of life, friendship, and overcoming obstacles. None of my immediate family was present, and I didn't miss any of them. This realization alone shows how much I've progressed emotionally. During the reception, Martha gave a moving toast. She spoke about how she met me at one of the most vulnerable moments of my life, how she witnessed my transformation from victim to survivor and then advocate for other victims. She said I was an example that it's never too late to take control of your life, to set boundaries, to demand the respect you deserve. I cried during that toast, but they were tears of joy and gratitude, not sadness or regret. I keep the recordings and documents of everything that happened in a safe deposit box at the bank. Not because I need them for legal purposes anymore, but as reminders. On days when I'm tempted to romanticize the past, to think that perhaps I overreacted or was unfair, I listen to those conversations again. I hear Rachel saying I wouldn't last long, David calculating how much they could gain from my death, the 2 of them discussing ways to hasten my end. These recordings are my antidote to the human tendency to minimize past traumas, to give second chances where they aren't deserved. I recently updated my will again, not to change beneficiaries but to include personal messages for each charity that will receive a portion of my estate. I explain why I chose each one, what aspect of their work resonates with me, and what impact I hope my funds will have. I transformed my will from a simple legal document into a statement of values, a manifesto about what truly matters in life. For the foundation I created, I established a perpetual trust that will ensure its operation for decades after my death. I named Martha a lifelong director, with the authority to appoint successors when she can no longer serve. I specified that the foundation should always prioritize cases where elderly people are being exploited by their own family members, as these are the most painful and the most difficult to combat due to the emotional complications involved. I sometimes wonder how different my life would be if Thomas were still alive. My husband was a wise and observant man. I'm sure he would have recognized David and Rachel's intentions long before I did. He was always more skeptical of people's motives, while I tended to see the best in everyone. His absence left a void that David and Rachel skillfully exploited, knowing I was alone and vulnerable. But I also believe Thomas would be proud of how I coped, how I found the strength to fight back. The house I live in now is smaller than my previous one, but it's perfect for me. I sold the large property where I raised David and where so many memories, now tarnished, resided. I bought a 2-bedroom house in a senior living community, a place where I feel safe and part of a community. I have neighbors who have become friends, who check in regularly, who invite me for morning walks and afternoon movie sessions. It's a simple life, but infinitely richer in genuine affection than anything I had before. I recently gave an interview to a local newspaper about elder financial abuse. The reporter was fascinated by my story and wanted to focus on the dramatic aspect of family betrayal. But I steered the conversation toward the educational aspect, emphasizing the warning signs other seniors should watch for. I talked about how sudden changes in family behavior, especially a sudden increase in attention and care after a medical diagnosis, can be red flags. I explained the importance of never signing documents under duress, of always having an independent attorney review important paperwork, and of maintaining control over one's own finances no matter how inconvenient it may seem. The article generated an overwhelming response. We received over 50 calls at the foundation from people asking for help or information. Some were from concerned seniors who recognized similar patterns in their own families. Others were from adult children genuinely concerned about their parents, wanting to know how to protect them from predatory siblings or other family members. It was gratifying to see that sharing my story could have such a broad impact. A woman named Helen called me personally after reading the article. She was 76 years old and in the early stages of a similar situation to mine. Her daughter had started doing exactly the same things Rachel did to me. More frequent visits, questions about finances, suggestions about establishing power of attorney. Helen said that reading my story made her feel like she was looking at her own future if she didn't take action. We were able to connect her with one of our attorneys, who helped her establish appropriate protections before the situation deteriorated. We saved Helen from going through the same hell I went through, and that was worth every difficult moment of my own journey. My health remains surprisingly good. My cardiologist told me at my last appointment that my heart is functioning better than that of many patients 20 years younger. I attribute this not only to the medications and the successful surgery, but mainly to the peace of mind I found by removing toxicity from my life. Chronic stress literally kills, and I was being slowly poisoned by the situation with David and Rachel. Getting rid of them was like removing a malignant tumor, allowing the rest of my body to heal. I began writing a book about my experience. Not for fame or financial gain, but because several people suggested that a complete narrative could be a valuable resource for other victims of family abuse. I'm working with a ghostwriter who is helping me organize decades of memories, documents, and emotions into a coherent and impactful narrative. The book will include not only my personal story but also educational sections on legal rights, available resources, and protection strategies. The book's working title is This Old Woman Won't Last Long, the same cruel words I heard Rachel whisper that rekindled my fight. We want to transform that dismissive phrase into a cry of resistance, showing that older people are not passive victims waiting to be exploited, but people with agency, rights, and the ability to fight for themselves. Clara has been my rock throughout this entire process. She never judged my decisions, never tried to convince me to give David more chances, never suggested I was being too harsh. She simply supported me unconditionally, was there through every difficult moment, celebrated every victory with me. It's the kind of familial love I always assumed I would have with my son, but which I discovered existed in the form of a devoted sister. I've updated my will once again to include a special legacy for Clara. In addition to the portion of the financial inheritance already intended for her, I've also left her all the family jewelry, photo albums, and objects of sentimental value. These are things David and Rachel coveted not for their emotional value but for the monetary value they could obtain by selling them. Clara will cherish these things for what they truly represent. Memories of a family that was once united and happy, before greed corrupted everything. I sometimes wonder what kind of grandmother I would be if circumstances were different. I imagine myself surrounded by grandchildren, telling stories, baking cookies, being the loving and present grandmother my own grandmother was to me. Jennifer and Matthew stole that from me as much as they stole money. They stole the possibility of a genuine relationship, of happy memories, of true intergenerational connection. This is a kind of loss that no legal process can compensate, no monetary value can restore. But I've found other ways to fill that void. I have several adopted grandchildren, through the foundation and my social circle. Children and grandchildren of friends who treat me with the affection and respect my own grandchildren never showed. Children in my condo who call me Grandma Margaret and bring me drawings and flowers from the garden. It's not the same as it would have been with my own family, but it's real and genuine in a way my relationship with Jennifer and Matthew never was. Revenge, I've discovered, isn't a dish served cold. It's not even revenge, really. It's justice. It's establishing consequences for actions, it's protecting myself from further harm, it's ensuring that the wealth I've built goes to causes that truly matter. I call it revenge only because David and Rachel certainly interpret it that way, but in reality, it's simply me regaining control over my own life and my own decisions. There are days when I feel profound sadness for what I've lost. Not the money that was stolen, that has been recovered or no longer matters. But the illusion of family, The belief that I had people who loved me unconditionally, the hope of growing old surrounded by loving children and grandchildren. These losses are real and hurt in ways that physical scars never could. I allow myself to feel this sadness when it arises. I cry when I need to. I process the grief for a relationship that will never exist again. But then I remember that I'm better now. Happier, healthier, more at peace. I remember the people I helped through the foundation, the genuine friendships I formed, the freedom of living without the constant fear of being exploited. And I realize that I've lost not only the illusion of family, but also something far more valuable: truth, autonomy, and renewed purpose. If you're listening to or reading this story, especially if you're someone in a similar situation, know that it's never too late to take back control. No matter your age, no matter how long the abuse has been going on, you have the right to protect yourself and demand respect. A real family doesn't ask you to sacrifice your dignity or your assets. True love doesn't come with financial expectations. And if the people around you only show affection when they expect to inherit something, then it's not love they're offering. Seek professional help. Find an attorney specializing in elder law. Document everything. Install cameras if necessary. Record conversations where legal. Protect your documents and passwords. Don't sign anything under duress. Trust your instincts when something seems wrong. And above all, remember that you deserve dignity, respect, and genuine love, no matter your age. My story is still being written. I intend to live many more years, enjoying each day with the intensity of someone who was close to losing everything and managed to recover not only their possessions but also their self-esteem. I will continue working at the foundation, helping others who are going through what I went through, transforming my pain into purpose. I will continue cultivating true friendships, creating happy memories, and living fully. And when the time finally comes for my will to be read, when David, Rachel, Jennifer, and Matthew sit in that room waiting to hear about their inheritance, when the lawyer opens the file and begins to read, I hope they feel the full weight of what they've lost. Not the money, though they will certainly miss that. But the opportunity to have had a mother, a mother-in-law, a grandmother who loved them and would have shared everything with them happily if only they had reciprocated with true love instead of calculated greed. The last line of my will, which I wrote personally and insisted be read aloud, reads, "You didn't lose an inheritance. You lost me. And I was worth far more than any amount of money. I hope you live the rest of your lives knowing that." If you identified with my story, please like and subscribe to the channel. In the comments, tell me if you've been through something similar or if you know someone in this situation. Share this story with anyone who needs to hear that it's possible to fight back, that it's never too late to regain your dignity. And remember, you're not alone in this struggle. There are resources, there are people who genuinely care, there is hope even in the darkest situations. Thank you for listening to me until the end.